Yeah, I think this would be good. I've got I've titled it, what can a physio teach us about sprint coaching?
Nothing.
And well, that's the thing. I feel like most sprint coaches are not going to know. And they're going to say, what can this guy teach me about sprint coaching?
That's right.
And I feel like most sprint coaches who have been in the game for a significant amount of time will know that that's not true at all. Like I find that, in my own history, my own experience, some of the best coaches of sprinters have been physiotherapists or therapists of some sort, whether it be chiropractors or whatever, because they see movement so much better and it's from a different lens in a different way than what we do in our little, sometimes reductionist, overly specific way. And
if that physio also knows their way around some Olympic lifting, then you can really begin to understand, I think, really what's going on. And again, anyone who's listening, full caveat, I do not know how to train sprinters. I just know what your body should be able to do, and I know how to mobilize to get into that position, and I know what training we have available to reinforce the position.
I mean, like, good movement is just good movement.
That's right.
Sometimes we just, we get lost in all the minutiae and all the details of whatever sport that we are actually coaching.
That's correct.
Good movement is good movement. And if we can identify good movement, we can identify a good mover, So I want to back up a little bit, provide a little context, maybe, a little sort of a jumping off point for our chat. So I wanted to kind of describe, and I wouldn't mind getting your thoughts on this if you want to hop in or jump in or offer your thoughts at any point, do so. If not, no biggie, we can just sort of jump in. So we're going to jump in sort of the middle of this process. But I want to talk about my process when people come to me and ask me to look at someone, like I've done with you, right? I've sent you videos and say, hey, Kelly, what do you think of this? And you have a process that you go through in your brain. And, you're not maybe cognizant of the entirety of it now at this point in your career, but you go through this and then you offer some feedback. And I do the same, right? And as both of us are educators, we try to figure out what this is, like what we do quite naturally, write it down sometimes. In your case, you probably make a video of it and then share it to our communities and try to educate people, which is what we're kind of doing today. So, in my own process, it's kind of 3 steps. I identify something, so an athlete, I'm asked to look at an athlete. So first I go through this identification process, then I interpret it, and then I do some sort of intervention. Or if I'm not working with the athlete, then I recommend some sort of intervention. It's 3 I's. It's easy: identify, interpret, and then intervene. The first step, identification, for me is like a 3-step process. I observe first, observe the athlete just moving. I try to then identify the context of it and finally understand the movement content. So just looking, basically, essentially, watch the athlete do stuff both in and out of context. Pretty simple. Interpretation is kind of what I want to talk to you about, and what I'm kind of really excited about, getting some thoughts on some of these videos that I'm going to fire your way. By the way, we're going to look at some videos, and I have not sent these to you beforehand. You are not familiar with any of the athletes that I'm going to be sending you videos of.
This is true.
It's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
It's going to be I'm going to scan. It's like a blind reading. Ride the snake.
Exactly. So the identification process is 2 steps for me. So first we need to figure out, so if we're looking at something and we'll say we have a problem or an issue is probably a better word than a problem, because our first step is to try to identify whether that problem is actually a problem or not. Some things may be problematic, but not necessarily problems per se, right? So, and we've talked about this before with dorsiflexion conversations and things like that. And I think I've sent you a couple of videos that may not necessarily be problems, but are potentially problematic. I've got one sprinter, and actually we'll look at some video of him a little later. He runs a significantly externally rotated feet. Like he runs like a duck. He walks like a duck. He's always ran like a duck. He's always walked like a duck. So we look at, if somebody just came in and didn't see this guy and hadn't spent any time with this athlete ever, they would say, this is a problem and we need to fix this. This guy walks like this. He's an elite sprinter. He walks with his feet out at 45 degrees, and he sprints at his feet probably 30 degrees, 30 to 35 degrees on both sides. But here's the issue, right? He's been moving with this way for at least as long as I've been coaching him, 6 years, probably significantly longer than that. He's 30 now. He's probably been moving this way minimum 20 years, I'd say, right? So that's, you know, if we say we have to fix this, there's a potential real big risk in that may outweigh any potential reward. The step we have to take is ask, essentially, is whatever we're going to be doing here, whatever this intervention will be, whatever the input is it going to positively affect his health and or his performance?
And let me stop you and say, I agree with everything that you've said.
Okay, good. We're okay so far. All right. So, the risk reward, like ratio there of any intervention is probably too high for us to really go all in on some sort of intervention. Now, this is where context comes in. If this is a 14-year-old, it's a totally different answer to that question. Where is the risk reward ratio for a 14-year-old relative to an elite sprinter who's 30, who's never injured, and he's running 10 flat? Or if you've got a 14-year-old who's maybe has some issues and so on.
That's
and so
right.
forth, right?
And,
So
and let me add some layering in there. If an athlete is having pain with a problem because a tissue cannot support, or we're using the joint in a way or a tissue system in a less effective way, that's begetting upstream perturbations. We're seeing ripples in the system. And that's matched with we've seen a change in mechanics, or we have a previous injury history, then those things are even sort of, then maybe the conversation is a little different. So if I'm working with a Cy Young Award winner who's saying, I can no longer throw the ball the way I want to throw, when we restore or return someone's native mechanics, their brain automatically uses that information and available range. And I don't ever change just as an aside, I wouldn't change this guy's technique. I would wonder if I can modify and give him inputs through a parallel movement system, which would be my training gym time training, where his brain, one, says, I now have a movement choice that's more available to me, but he'll make that choice based on his availability. And then we add into the fact that he's never been injured, he's very fast, and that fascia and tissue support system is supporting his current movement strategy. And if we were going to move him towards a position that would suggest better ankle function, better glute function, better hip function, again, let me say that would suggest those things, that would be a slow process that would occur over time and be at the athlete's brain's discretion, that the athlete would start to choose a straighter foot position because it was more effective movement solution.
Yeah, so that's the next step. That's perfect. That's a really great segue there into sort of what the next thing I want to talk about, right? So that's where I talk about, interpretation, interpreting what the movement is, and then is it a problem? And second, if it is a problem, categorizing it into what type of problem it is.
That's right.
Is that a technical problem, or is that, as you're saying there, a mechanical problem? So this may, I've got some pushback from some people on these terms, but for me, these terms just to make sense for me and for my dumb brain, and they tend to make sense, or they seem to make sense for a lot of us other dumb coaches like me. So let me know what you think of it. This is how I sort of define the two, right? So a technical problem is one where, the athlete moves in a way we feel is less than ideal, from a biomechanical first principle standpoint, but they do have the ability to move in a better way, i.e. they possess the requisite action capabilities, the mobility, the force producing ability, the musculoskeletal structure, whatever, to move better. Examples might be like an athlete who sprints way high up on their toes. but they've got the ankle mobility to not do so. They have the ankle mobility to dorsiflex and rock through their ankle, effectively. Or they're running with 90-degree fixed arm angles, but they have the ability, or they possess the ability, to angulate through their elbow joint. Or they push overly horizontally on the ground when upright in order to attain, triple extension. Like, all of these are technical issues that have been coached into them, right? It's important that with most technical issues almost always stem from a faulty understanding of what good mechanics is, especially in running and in sprinting.
We categorize that as generally as skill. So that's our skill. This is a skill limitation or a skill misunderstanding, or a person can't feel. And again, feel and interoception can be a part of that, but as a technical piece, this is why we work and refine, and why golfers change their golf swing, and they're looking for a better solution based on their anthropometry and their available skills to do. So I would put that technical piece, for me, that makes complete sense in the language of this is a coaching related issue and a choice that you and your coach are making, or your interpretation of what your coach is asking you, or you've never been coached before and this is your novel solution.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah. I by the way, I really like that word that you used a little earlier, native mechanics. That's the first time I've heard you saying that.
Oh,
I really like that.
You can use it as much as you like. I give you full authorship there.
Appreciate that. So you've got a technical issue, technical problem. The mechanical issue is one where the athlete moves in a way which we think is less than ideal, but they lack the action capabilities to move in a way that may be more effective. Right. So it's, for example, the young sprinter who lacks hip projection during acceleration and therefore stands up prematurely during a sprint. We can ask that athlete all day long to stay low, to project lower, but if they lack that ability, the force producing ability to actually project, it doesn't matter what we do. Right.
And I really, you made a case on Twitter recently about the NFL Combine, and you made the case for some of those guys being a little bit taller earlier because it was a better position for them in which to generate force and maybe resulting in fast times. And we kind of both agreed that that might be a tactical strategy, but also might actually allow them to put their hips into a position where they were more capable of generating force than being hunched over. So I agree with you. Still agree with you, Stu.
Listen, I screenshotted that response. This is your response. It was awesome. I was actually going to put it in this, and I totally forgot about it. I've got it right here.
Oh boy!
There's usually a ton of hip flexion missing. This quicker upright would give them better access to more workable hip ranges, and that's perfect. Like, that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? There's a physio who's offering sprint advice, like really excellent sprint advice, without really necessarily being a sprint coach or understanding a ton about sprint mechanics, but who understands movement, right? I wanted to actually start with that. So it's a really good thing that you reminded me about. Good job.
How about this? We could just start with this. Everyone pretty much agrees that your body should be able to do a certain fixed number of things. Every physician thinks this is a normative range. Every physio thinks this is a normative range. Sometimes the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons disagrees from the American Academy of Family Practitioners by 5 degrees. But everyone thinks your hip should move this much. And so an interesting starting place as we're trying to untangle complex movement behavior is to ask, is this person capable of doing what every human being should do? Because one of the things that I want people to keep in mind is that the best coaching in the world for over 100 years, the technique has come down through understanding of what the best expression of the physiology is. So how many sprinting coaches have there been in the history of humans trying to run faster? Humans have been running against other humans for as long as there have been humans chasing down game. So I think this is the oldest game there is. Maybe throwing a rock at something is number one, but running and who can run the fastest. So one of the things that you have the ability to do is begin to interpret what choices and what language or what movement solutions are being coached because those are the found solutions of how to get the most out of the human physiology based on not supranormal ranges of hip motion, just basic ranges of hip motion.
Right. Yeah, that gets down to the crux of it for me. And that's where I believe, in my opinion, in my experience, sort of working with sprint coaches around the world for the last 25, 30 years, where they get confused. They feel they see a movement aberration, they see a problem, they see a dysfunction, they see an issue, and they try to coach the athlete out of that issue, out of that problem, out of that dysfunction, out of that aberration.
And
Not
I learned
understanding that it could be limited by their whatever, their action capabilities. So their mobility.
action capability is a great phrase that could be don't have access through inhibition, don't have range of motion, working around an old injury. And let me give you two examples that I would think make this case. One came from when I was being an assistant coach at an Olympic lifting camp. I was a young physio, and I came down and I was working for another master coach, an Olympic coach, and just helping him run his seminars as a fly on the wall. And I remember thinking, I'll never, ever learn the 3,000 skill transfer exercises this coach has at his fingertips to solve a movement solution. He has 1 billion drills, 1,000 solutions, 1,000 coaching cues. And I realized at that moment I was lost. I was like, until I spend 30 years coaching Olympic lifting, I'll never understand. And then I was like, wait a minute. This person can't put their arms over their head. Why don't we solve that problem first instead of coaching around it? And that coach had never looked at that as a limiting factor, assuming that the athlete did have access to her range or her native range or complete range. What he saw was, I see an athlete deviating from good position, and his pattern recognition was such that he could identify movement compensation in his sport, but did not connect that to, does this athlete have the range of motion or access to the range of motion? And suddenly I realized, boy, I don't need 5,000 coaching drills. I need to make sure that the athlete can do what she should be able to do with that shoulder, giving, again, this is not a style technique choice now because this feels better and it's more successful, or that this athlete's working around an injury. Match that with the fact that I've worked with, high-level pitchers who've had a nail problem, and they go around the big toe, and lo and behold, they throw wrong, and it's because their big toe hurts. And that actually is a case study from Sue Falzoni, who was working with a major league pitcher who was walking around an ingrown toenail and sort of started to push off so he didn't have to develop force through the toenail, through his big toe, turned the foot out, started to overextend shoulder, and it caused a shoulder problem. So keeping in mind that it may be the hip, but we need to be assessing, is this athlete trying to solve a movement problem based on an injury or pain? And now we just bucket ourselves into another category.
Yeah.
Can't access it. This is an athlete who's going very fast trying to solve a problem.
Yeah, there's a ton in that, obviously. We could just go down a huge rabbit hole in that. As far as, coaches are really bad at this, as well as a lot of physios, to be honest, where they just get distracted by a symptom and they just work on this symptom over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Without
well,
really
it is good if
back and try to figure out what the problem is.
If there's a fire in your kitchen, I do recommend that you pay attention to the fire in the kitchen first, and then you can have the next conversation. How did this fire start?
Yeah. So talk to me about what you think is the potential danger in applying a technical cue for a mechanical problem. You talked about that, say that pitcher, and you're trying to fix his arm motion where the problem is actually mechanical and it's down there at his big toe. So the pitching coach is probably not going to be aware of that. Pitching coach is just going to be over and over working on these arm mechanics. Talk to me about the potential problem in that.
So I'll work with a pitcher that I worked with from the Giants, superstar, Cy Young Award winner, missing internal rotation on his lead hand. So this problem first. And so as he goes to reach and stretch, the shoulder would translate forward into a less effective position, thereby changing how he was able to organize and stabilize his other scapula. So we started to see All we had to do was give him his range of motion back. And his brain immediately was like, I can access this position and do what I'm trying to do. So a lot of times, initially, we see an athlete trying to do the skill, do the drill, make the changes. And if you can restore a native range, again, there's always, I think Dan said this best, as you pointed out, he's made a good career on restoring native ranges. Very simple. And this is one of the reasons why trackside therapy is so important for a coach to be able to say, I wonder if I can just take this one problem off the table. You don't have any internal rotation of your hip. Okay, well, that's something we know how to address. And it's not going to be such a crazy change that this athlete suddenly explodes down the track. My experience doesn't happen.
Yep.
So with that athlete, we looked at that was a limitation. And then he had no internal rotation of his drive leg. So when he pushed off, he couldn't turn the hip. So that basically his leg was open, his knee was open, and he had to create a valgus torque where the knee would collapse, the leg would internally rotate, but it was a weak position from which to extend and drive and finish. And all we did was say, here are some ways that you can begin to remind your brain to own this position. Here are some mobilizations, which I call position transfer exercise. And then here are some things you can do in the weight room to just keep an eye on this, which include things like muscle snatches. I just had him muscle snatch the barbell, empty barbell for muscle snatches. And that was enough to give him his range of motion back and maintain those changes. But again, in the context of an athlete being able to then say, I can do what my brain is telling my body to do, I can do it now, right? I don't have to solve that. So keep that in mind in terms of when those solutions work, they look like magic. You had a young intern who was having a really hard time locking out his snatch. He couldn't lock out the snatch, and he came to our course, and I was like, let's look at your starting position. And he, once again, did not have the internal rotation of his shoulder, and so he had to do a whole bunch of very complex problems and movement solutions to lock out his snatch. And he had pain, and no one had looked at it. And I was like, well, no one's looked at your starting position, because you're starting somewhere, going somewhere, which is the next sort of follow along in terms of what I'm understanding when I watch someone move. I don't just look at a snapshot. You send me videos of forward and back and forward and back and forward and back. And I need to know where they're coming from and where they're going to understand the context of what I'm understanding in that moment, right? And when again, all we did was give him access to his native range, not super native range, what he should be able to do. And his shoulder felt better. So instead of chasing the symptom down, which was his body trying to just get his attention over and over again in overused tissue, all we did was say, hey, let's first principles here is that you don't even have access to the range of motion required for the sport. You don't have access to the range of motion required for the skill. And you don't even have access parallel to the range of motion required to train for the sport or the skill. So that should be really easy to pick up. But the fact that no one was picking it up leads me to believe that we had a hole in our thinking.
Yeah, I want to get into that as we probably look at a couple of videos. I mean, the question being for coaches who might be watching this would be now, all right, when is this a technical problem and when is this a mechanical problem? And how do I, as a coach of 15 or 20 kids, understand the difference? And then how can I identify what is the difference? So maybe we can talk about that as we watch through some videos.
And I want everyone to understand that when I write Stu, because you are a really competent coach, but once in a while you just say, hey, what do you think? I think you do it for my own education. But I always answer back with queries.
Yeah.
Is this a possibility? I'm never definitive, but here's my problem list of things I'd want to check and assess. And I just want people to understand that I'm always making a hypothesis, the same way that every coach is making a hypothesis. Here's what my coach at Q is. The athlete is moving better and now integrating the skill and integrating the transfer exercise for the drill that we're doing. And then I make another hypothesis based on that information. So anything that I'm doing, I just want everyone to understand I'm never definitive. I was like, these are the things that I would check to make sure that I'm not making an error in my thinking. I'm really trying to be open, and I think you know that we never talked about that, but I am always not like, this is the problem. I'm like, oh, I wonder if this, or has this happened? And that means I can always be curious, and it makes it easy for me to say, oh, that was a bad hypothesis. And I just cross it off. And I haven't put that flag in the sand of it's this or nothing.
Yeah, it's 100%. So it's, whenever I send you a video, I generally send it to 4 or 5 or 6 other people. And it's all of them. And it's only the 4 or 5 or 6 people who are top of the game, right? Like, I really, really trust and respect their opinions on what they're seeing. And they're all exactly the same. They've got questions. They've got questions of context. They've got questions of history. They ask, hey, have you thought about this, this, and this? It could be this. Hey, have you checked this? What does this look like? It's always that, right? So that's a really, it's good that you said that, because I don't feel like, I don't feel like the young 25 or 30-year-old Kelly Starrett or Stu McMillan would be thinking that way.
Less.
We'd have thought it's that.
And I want people, this goes back to just sort of foundational type 1 error thinking. I want everyone to understand that elite coaching, the athlete doesn't do what the coach says. This is a conversation between athlete and coach, and the athlete owns just as much as the coach. And anytime a coach is working with another coach, it's the same conversation. That this is always a dialogue, and that's what makes it so fantastic. I think she has wind resistance issues with that jacket.
Hey, we're in Atlanta. It's cold. This is actually from today. So it's took some video today. This is the first few bits of the video will just be from some drills, and then I'll have some videos of her doing some sprinting. So let's just watch a little bit. These are her drills from today. And we'll just watch through, and then I can go back and I can slow some of it down for you. The Nigerian 100-meter sprinter who's ran 11.3. So almost elite, kind of elite, depends on your definition of it. But I'll remind everybody who's watching this, Kelly has not seen this lady ever before. Never seen any of these videos before. I think it's just one more to go here. All right, so where do you want to start? What of those 4 or 5 different drills would you like me to go back to?
Go back where we get a head-on approach.
Yeah. Okay.
I think, so one is always, as a reminder in the internet, we never make comments about why an athlete is moving a certain way on the internet unless you have solicited advice from that athlete or that coach. You'll never see me talk about why someone's moving a certain way, because I don't know how much sleep she had last night. I don't know what her training volume was yesterday. I don't know how beat up she is. I don't know how warmed up she is. So just everyone understand that. I'm always like, hey, here's a snapshot of what's going on today. And I'm trying to understand that. But I want people to understand that that's one of my thinking pieces, right? So what I think is notable first is that.
Let me ask you a question before you go to that. Why did you choose front on first?
Well, the first thing that I want to look at is from the very first warm-up video, and again, I don't know how warmed up she is or how prepped she was, but what I picked up here is that her foot contact when she first puts foot on the ground is straight, and then she defaults to a less effective hopping position on her subsequent hops, where now her big toe is not working like a big toe, and she is suddenly turned her feet out, and she has a different strategy as she starts to move through. So I'm like, what's going on there? Why is she adopting a different propulsion strategy as she does that? And the difference there in my thinking, so everyone understands, is one hypothesis for why I'm seeing suddenly is that she goes from a flexed position where she has access to a range to a more extended position where the anterior tissues, the quads, the psoas, the iliacus, that anterior fascial line is being challenged as she hops when her body's over her center of mass or center of basic support. And the compensation, the predicted compensation strategy when someone is restricted in the anterior line is to externally rotate the foot So I'm like, curious, what's going on there? Is she just stiff and tired yet? Well, I don't know yet. She's still getting warmed up. But again, some of the places where to start on these things is, hey, well, we can begin to simplify the system by saying, hey, would I expect the best hopping to happen with the foot externally rotated? And I can tell you that I've watched a lot of triple jumpers, and there's never a foot that gets turned out when they're slamming that foot down. That foot is very straight because that position allows the body to generate the most force. So as we start to now challenge greater hip extension demands on this athlete, I'm starting to build a pattern. I wonder if she'll maintain that pattern, or will that first contact looks good, but then as she has to really compensate, will she get that foot back straight? Because that's what she's doing. She finishes, but she's well coached, and her first contact is always foot straight again. So that's interesting to me as I look at this.
Okay. And that's almost certainly, when we look at the difference between a technical issue and a mechanical issue, this is certainly something that she's not cognitively trying to control, right? So you would say it's that's a mechanical issue here that's going on. We don't know whether it's a problem yet, but we've identified something.
Yeah, and we're just warming up, right? And part of one of the things that you've done a really good job of with the program, the Altis program, is that our warm-up is our assessment. I'm beginning to build a picture of what's going on with the athlete today.
Yeah.
Where do we need to put our attention so that she can come back to her sprinting body? That's really what I'm interested in. And the first thing I would say is to this athlete is I would lay her down. I would say, hey, can you hop with your feet straight? Good.
Yep.
Like, hey, just to see if you can hop with your feet straight. You can't. I wonder what's going on there, right? So again, starting to build a pattern. The other thing I'm always interested in is the left foot doing something different than the right foot? And this is an easy place for people to pick up, but her strategies are universal in that she's pretty much doing the same thing on both sides. So, you know what I mean? I'm not seeing, because if I see one foot speaking French and the other is speaking Spanish, then I'm like, oh, hey, that's curious to me. But you know what, again, I just see generally, and it also fits the pattern when I have very powerful athletes, as you and I were kidding about earlier, I feel like I can never get them to spend enough time with the hip in extension.
Yeah. Because
those anterior fascial lines will get restricted as just a fact that she's a modern human who has to sit in a car and sit in the bus and sit in the chair. And she just, that is just a universal pattern. So everyone understands there is a relative internal rotation that happens in the hip to keep the foot straight as the leg moves past the hip. So as the knee starts to translate into extension, that leg should be able to stay straight. Keep in mind that when people are running really fast, they are creating high amounts of torsion into the ground. They're really literally ripping the ground. You can hear the cleats, you can see it. And so we would expect sometimes the foot to spin, but again, don't get me wrong, I still want to see that foot is straight, especially as I'm trying to prep, because now her arch is collapsing on those jumps. And I'm not getting the most expression out of her. So I'll stop talking now. Are you following with what I'm saying and what
100%. The two other things that sort of jump my way is she lands on this left, almost internally rotated, like super plantar flexed. And we'll see that as we look from the side, but also in internal rotation. And then just dumps and leaves externally rotated relative to the right. So we watch the right as it lands, and she actually does a pretty good job. She lands pretty clean there. And then there's a lot of external rotation though on toe off. So she's getting into extension through externally rotating that leg. And you'll see as the recovery, let's look at the swing phase of the left. So as the left comes up, the knee just basically comes straight up to the sternum. It goes outside a little bit, but it immediately comes straight to the sternum. And you watch the right knee, and it translates outside of the center of mass, goes way out there, and it comes super late to the midline. Really late. Never really gets to the midline, just sort of gets right in front of the ASIS there.
And Stu and I are describing the absolute same phenomenon The only difference in what we've said is that he's used a couple other cues about what's going on in the system, so he understands where the motions are, so you can understand how that knee is tracking, not in a line, but going around a problem, and looking at what that initial contact is around how much change is going on in the athlete. And we tend to see a co-contraction problem of the hip will start to express itself where the athlete is creating a whole bunch of stiffness in the foot to manage that foot. Anyway, that we'll get into that. But I love looking at the knee arcs there and looking at the change in differences between that internal and straight. I really appreciate those things.
There's a lot to look at here. I love this video of her. I mean, she's super powerful. I mean, you could probably tell that she's super powerful. But there's a lot going on.
So the first thing that people pick up is that it looks like there's a little difference in her strategy from the right leg to the left leg. That she paused the ground with her left leg in a much more straight position, and it feels like that left leg is truncated in its ability to come out in front of her body. So that's just what I'm looking at. And again, one of the things that I'm interested in here is, what is going on potentially at that big engine at the hip that she's making these strategy choices. And is there a difference side to side? So I would say that, tactically, if someone remember that her left foot was more internally rotated when it's stride on that side, and which would tell me that she has better access to her hip range on her left side than she does her right side. That was just something that would be clinically in my head. But I see that you can see that there's a different stride approach, that leg is, the left side looks different than the right side there.
And talk to me about, what do you think? Like, most track coaches will see this and they can identify, there's a lot of asymmetry here. The left leg is clearly doing something very different from the right. It's pawing way out in front, as you said. It's clawing the ground. So a typical track coach who may not understand the difference between sort of technical problems, mechanical problems, they'll say, well, just don't, come straight up and down with it. Don't allow that foot to get out in front of your knee. What do you think is potentially problematic about that type of advice here, if anything?
Well, the first thing is, I would love my athletes to ask, and again, putting a coach on is, what do you feel when you're running? Can she feel that she's making a different choice right to left? Or is there's so many people watching, there's a camera on, I'm in my head, I don't know, coach, it just feels the same to me, right? What I think is interesting here is, is there a difference? So coming back to one of the things we said is, in that last piece, I tend to see people who have limited hip extension capacity. They have to make up that power somewhere else. They're going to have to create a forced solution somewhere else. And if she's starting to be stiff out the back, she will end up overreaching in the front. That's usually is the pattern. And where now she's clawing in order to solve that problem, because she may not have access to her butt and her hamstrings in that more hip extended position. And usually we see that overstriding is an oversimplification, but overreaching or making up for my ability to not feel. And again, she should not be in triple extension, moving past that. But if that athlete is not feeling like she can access her hip extension, or even into a neutral position, you'll see that they'll have to make up that time on the front in order to just keep moving forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, if I'm now a coach of this lady, as I am, talk to me about, okay, and I don't want to get into potential solutions right away, but let's now pretend that we've watched this lady move.
And you can see here on her right, watch what's happening on her right foot. I think it's interesting that in order to solve that solution, and oftentimes it doesn't look like her knee really ends up meaningfully beyond her hip at all.
No.
Like and she's actually in a slightly flexed position from the torso all the way down. Not again, looking at, I don't know how much is required in sprinting at this point at this speed, but she's not comfortable even getting her hip over her sort of total power body position. Right. She's done generating there, and you can't see it in the coat, but she's, there's not a lot of ability to dissociate that leg from the pelvis when she's at the trail end.
Yeah, so that's her maximum level of hip extension there.
That's right.
It's pretty much neutral, isn't it?
I would say that's
less.
If you looked at her torso, I would give her generously, because I don't want to just look at the knee hip. I need to see the relationship between the hip and the shoulder, or hip and the trunk. And what you're actually seeing is that she's still flexed in this position.
Yeah, and it's on the left, pretty much the same. Yeah. So let's move on. Let's go in. I've got some good videos of Annie also.
Anything I'm saying. So again, I don't know what those drills should look like. I picked up on. I see a pattern where I'm potentially starting to identify that I have a person who's in a compensation that the human movement model starts to predict, which is the foot will turn out if someone doesn't have the sufficiency in that position. And we're starting to see a slightly different change in strategy as she was doing that initial piece, that the left side was looking different than the right side. Wow, she's powerful.
So this is a different day, obviously. This is from Saturday. And this is from another different day. But this is now her actually sprinting. She'll be in flats here. So this will be the end of the warm-up. The first one would have been an all-out 120. We'll just let this play through a little bit at half speed. Do you want to see any of this at normal speed, or is half speed okay?
No, half speed is much better.
Okay. So we can see now that, it's a much less constrained movement, obviously. And so much more reveals itself. Seeing much more of the puzzle at this point.
That's right.
You start seeing the, how the upper body's interrelated to what's going on with the lower body.
And, something that I tend to find in our running coaches is oftentimes it is poorly understood, sort of this relationship between shoulders and what's going on, and how the shoulders will often tell a lot of story because they are going to counterbalance and stabilize the system. So what you've got, the tail wagging the dog, for lack of a better phrase, in those situations where, you might start to see, hand coming across the body, trying to sort of account for some of the torsion demands in the athlete. So looking at that, right, the real question we start to see here is, I'm starting to see what I would describe as, I'm like, hey, it looks like she's not actually extending her shoulder very much on the right side. Right? Do we have a strategy that's similar left side to right side? And then, as we're sort of beginning to untangle this is a good situation where we can ask, is the shoulder the issue, or is the hip or the foot the strategy, or what's going on downstream, right? Where would I begin to have this conversation? I like to look at the feet to tell me what's going on with the hips. That's typically what's going on. That's one of the things that helps me understand that sufficiency. And you can see that there's a definitive difference between that right side and that left side.
Is that where you go first? Like if you're watching an athlete move, Is you go to the feet first generally?
It helps me understand what I'm seeing expressed, because that's the foot hits the ground is really where we're seeing a lot of the decision making and expressions of the athlete. Ultimately, the choices they're making or the choices that are available to them showing up, right? The problem is just cueing feet, as you know, may or may not solve the problem.
Yeah.
In this situation, as you say, how much dorsiflexion do I need to sprint fast? 0. I need 0 degrees of dorsiflexion. So what's nice then is I'm like, well, if she has negative dorsiflexion, that's a problem, but she probably has at least 0 and under loading. So when I start to kind of look upstream, and that last one is really good because you can start to see some of how fast she's having to move that hip back into a position. If you look at just her right knee, how that leg spins and how hard she has to work to bring that leg back across to the place to be able to generate force. What's amazing is how fast she is and how hard she's working. And I want what everyone to understand is I don't know if she has pain, but what I can tell you is that it's really hard to run this fast in some of those shapes that she's expressing. Which is, for me, a sign of like, wow, that's something I'm really interested in. If I see an athlete working really hard to be able to hit her shapes or their shapes, and they're still relatively fast, I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's not a person who's just weak or a person who's, So again, if you can pause where that knee's coming across her body just a little bit further forward there in her next stride, as her right knee comes up.
Right knee comes up?
Yep.
Right.
And then if you can advance just a smidge, I don't know. There you go. That is a position, that next frame is a position that doesn't, like if I ask you to jump as high as you could in that position, you're not going to be able to generate as much force as possible in that shape. So what is it about that? How did she get into that position, right? So we can certainly start by asking, well, does she have enough hip flexion to get into this sprinting position? And you can see the other foot is sort of spinning out and dumping a little bit. But again, this starts to go back to what we're starting to understand is I may have an athlete who's just good old fashioned stiff in the fascia and the quads and the anterior hip. And she has to make up for that. And you're seeing that that's how she's solving that solution from the backside, because she's missing her ability to extend the hip effectively. The knee has to spin. She doesn't feel comfortable even from that spinning position, bringing her knee back through. She has to bring her knee back around, and then it just takes more time. So again, my original hypothesis is that this is a person I would like to be looking at if I was going to lay her down, or if you want to talk about those things or not, the things I would check I would start her on her stomach and just flex her heel to her butt as an easy start. And that's going to
both sides?
For sure, both sides, because I'm interested in always looking at what's the system saying.
Yeah.
Right. And remember, the key to thinking about some of these range of motion aspects is that I need enough range of motion that my athletes can do what we know to be technically the best. And I want to eliminate a potential tissue restriction that this athlete is working around. So I'm building a hypothesis, and my hypothesis is I wonder if my athlete's quads are stiff. And again, I didn't say tight, I'm saying stiff, right? Fascia, the whole system. You can see in that position how much the knee really turns in and out, right? As she generates force on the ground, that is when that lower shank is vertical, right? Next one, that is just not a gorgeous position. She solves it by having to be out front and getting everything straight. And that's pretty amazing contact forward vector, given all the things she's got going on. And she ends up really far pronated on the outside or supinated on the outside, because that's the only solution she has. So it takes her big toe a long time to start to stiffen up. And there's a lot of sort of collapsed chain in the system before we start to see the sort of springiness before she can actually apply her power. What what I would say is that as I'm trying to interpret this, I'm trying to give the athlete access to her brain saying, go as fast as you can now. But there's a lot of positions here where she can't actually even closely access how much power she has.
Yeah. So you've
Her
got
brain physically will not let her generate as much force as she's capable of. It'll try to protect her.
Yep. So you don't have a table. You're a coach. You're out on the track.
Lay down on the grass.
Lie her down on the grass or on the ground.
And I want to flex the heel to the butt.
Yep.
And my range, that is my pass range, again, not supranormal, not mutant, is I'd like the heel to come within a fist width of the glute. So just bring the heel up. And again, what you'll see is if that's limited, it'll start to build tension. So not only are we potentially looking at one is just raw range of motion, and some athletes will be stiff. They'll have stiffness through range. And that may be why they fatigue and start to decay, or maybe that they're super powerful and they're just stiff through range. But if the athlete doesn't have access to that range, we're starting to just lay her stomach down, she can't do that, then I think, hey, I wonder if I have a stiffness issue that's starting to express itself. And the reason that is such a fair test to the athlete is that if I move the knee out and can flex the butt, we're like, okay. And most of the time when we assess that, the leg is out to the side anyway. The athlete is actually lying in flexion. And when we actually do that quick coach screen on that, one of the things that I want everyone to understand is that her body is in actually, her hip is in flexion. That with the power of these athletes laying on the ground, they have a lot of pressure through the quads and their stomachs are making, and there's actually a little tent at their hip joints. So we're actually assessing the hip, this knee flexion in a flexion biased position where we're putting the rectus femoris on a little slack. So if they're coming up with, hey, I see that I have a limitation here, for me, I'm like, oh, that goes on my problem list for sure, because the test is so fair. So that's a simple way to begin to look at that position of, does the athlete just have the sufficiency in the quads fascial system to be able to finish with that hip in extension or bias towards extension and the leg in that return position, which means she may not have enough range in the back. So that now I can here's another example of why I'm looking at the back as my starting place is in these repetitive motions, the beginning of the motion is the finish position for the last cycle. So oftentimes we're looking at foot contact, but for me in my head, I'm looking at where the athlete came from, right? That's sort of the way to think about the holistically, because that swing through phase is still part of this, how she gets to the foot on the ground. Yeah. And of course, we always typically start with foot on the ground. So I had a swimmer who was an Olympian going to trials, trying to make her first Olympic team, and she was having a really difficult time on her catch. So remember, shoulder, hip, same joint, same system, same analogs, and she could not get a good catch. And she and her coach are very good, and they did thousands of catch drills, and it turned out she was missing shoulder extension and some interrotation. So she did not have the ability to bring her shoulder hand out of the water without dumping the shoulder forward and creating a solution. Same solution. There's the flare. That knee that you're talking about here looks a little different. The elbow flares out. And as she came through, it was impossible for her to end up in a good catch position because of how she finished. And all we did was give her a couple drills to work on her finish position, and her catch immediately clicked up and she made her first Olympic team. So that strategy for me has come apart, where I just need to understand that yes, I'm looking what's happening through that whole gait cycle, but that the beginning of her contact to the ground is happening out the back. And the tissue stiffness that she's building to have to overcome that.
Most coaches would look at this and they would identify the significant asymmetry in what's going on with the arm swing. But you kind of mentioned that in passing, but why isn't that one of the first things that you would say? You've got one arm that's doing something very, very different from the other.
That's right. Well, remember, we saw some differences when she wasn't in such a speeded up motion. I started to see these leg symmetries in just some of her warm-up assessment, which is why one of the reasons we do those warm-up drills is to understand how our athletes are feeling, how they're feeling in their own bodies. Getting them, warm-up drills are helping the athlete find themselves again, remind their brains and their tissues to be able to feel what they're supposed to do. That's part of the warm-up, plus the physiology. But the secondary is to try to understand what's going on. So for the coach to understand what's going on. At those low speeds, I saw similar patterning or similar compensations, which are now, as you highlighted, are magnified. And until I really start to understand what's going on with the hips, which are the big engines, I'm just going to be going in circles chasing a shoulder problem.
Right.
And so I already have a differential diagnosis. I saw asymmetry in her warm-up. I saw asymmetry, or I saw deficient positions or incomplete positions. I don't even try to put a negative timber on it. This is how she's solving this problem. I'm curious about that. And at speed, this is her solution to that. And I can get all up in her head and feel it, but she literally cannot access her shoulder position based on what's going on with the hip.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Eventually, we're going to get there, because what I want you to see is right arm is hyperextended here. Right arm is hyperextended or nearly extended, straight. See that? Left arm remains bent the whole time. Right? So she has two different strategies for how she's even moving her shoulders through. That's a short lever, that's long lever, which of course is going to be coming down. But again, chicken or the egg first, and where am I going to make the fastest change? And all of these things in my head are saying, when I go to the gym, which movements do I think are going to expose this position? Which movements are going to give me a second movement language so that the athlete can feel these things? Because basically, we have two ways to help rewire an athlete to move. We have tempo, we can slow down, the brain pays attention, and we have isometrics. And it's really difficult to do tempo sprinting, and it's really difficult to do isometric sprinting. But as soon as I'm in a lunge position, or I'm doing a Franz Bosch step up, or I have benching or working on a push-up or pressing from those positions, I should see those limitations, which means my next weight room session, I can quickly check the shoulder or to see if that is really, in fact, what's going on. And you can see how much symmetry comes back to the shoulders as soon as she diminishes her speed. So again, as a coach, it's so crucial. I don't think everyone understands. All of the Altis coaches I've ever worked with are looking at how the athlete's moving during their warm-up, can easily put an athlete down to say, hey, let's make sure that knee comes to chest, that you have some inter-rotation, that you've got this rotation window so you can stabilize. And all of the Altis coaches also can go right to the weight room and begin to program and help that athlete reinforce those positions. That is the native of the coach, that you need to be able to speak those languages. Can you interpret what's happening during warm-ups? Can you interpret what's happening at speed during the high level? And then do you have a rudimentary understanding of how you would support this athlete's movement behavior in a choices of the weight room? Or is she making the same choices in the weight room reflected under those loads? Instead of speed load, you're adding load, and now you're just reinforcing the pattern, which is what I've seen universally from strength coaches, making this a bigger problem for the position coach, because the strength coach is saying, well, as long as you added another kilo to the bar, or you performed the sets, you're doing a good job, versus the strength and conditioning coach really understanding, we'll say strength coach here, or movement coach, really understanding that they're owning a whole 3 hours, 4 hours a week of programming, patterning, learning that's being expressed itself on the other side of the wall.
So, I don't know how much you want to talk about sort of what the intervention would be, like what the input would be, and what could your typical sort of strength and conditioning coach / track and field coach that may not necessarily have a lot of experience in therapy or physiotherapy. Is it a matter of just getting on the table and, all right, we'll identify that there's a tight hip flexor, tight quad complex on the left. Let's stretch that out. Is it that simple, or is there more that can be done here?
Well, real question is, how much meaningful change are we going to make? So remember that the inputs we're trying to give to the athlete always come back to one goal. Does the athlete move better, move faster? Yes or no? There's no reason why this athlete should be in the gym other than to run faster on the track.
Right.
There's no reason I should put this athlete on the table unless she has pain that I'm trying to help her get to the bottom of. Unless, again, it's the track. Again, how do we conjoin? So we're just looking at for performance therapy as another set of inputs so that the athlete can feel or access a position that she might not have been able to feel or access before. Now, as a coach, one of the things that I'm going to try to do is say, hey, look, here's what we've identified. Here's your responsibility to be able to nurture these positions. Because if you just go home and get on the sticks and start playing Xbox all day long, and you're not spending any time working on your hip extension, I'm not going to do that for you here on the track passively over and over and over again. So what I'm trying to do is build an environment where the athlete gets little doses all through. So suddenly we're going to do a lot more skipping related drills. For example, I don't know anything about drills, but I want to choose some drills that are exposing her to hip extension. In the weight room, I ask myself, what do I have available to me to be able to do that? Maybe that I'm pushing a sled where I'm asking her to keep all 5, met heads on the ground as she pushes the sled so she feels what that's like, right, as I load that. Maybe we're doing more lunging with an upright torso, right? Maybe, again, even that Franz Bosch idea of going from double leg up onto a box. Then her home interventions look like couch stretch, soft tissue mobilization. We're spending time, especially in that long lever hip extension position, and we're building an ecosystem that supports that so that we can start to tell the brain, you can have access to this, you're loading that position, you've got to change the tissue structures there and give her time to adapt. But if she gets that in these micro learning sessions where suddenly I'm changing or shaping some of her warm-up drills, because that's a great place to do it, we're going to have her working to the best of her ability today. That's going to be perfect. It's imperfect, but she's safe and still fast. In the gym, the coach has to be able to start to think, hey, I need to program to this, and more squats are not going to make this athlete a better runner. That's not a squatting related problem. So what tools do I have available to me to load that hip in extension? The therapist is saying, what are the home interventions where she can be doing this? And now suddenly I make a hypothesis. There's my gamble. I put my chips on the table. And guess what happens? In 99.9% of the time, unless she has the Nigerian hip syndrome, I don't even know what that is, right? Where we see that the athlete suddenly says, coach, it's feeling better. I feel faster. I felt more fluid. I could get my feet faster over. And we're like, great. That's what you should be feeling. The only metric that happens is, theoretically, how does it feel? Then I can prove that to myself with some tape. So that's how I'm starting to build this thing. But if the physio only looks at the knee flex and doesn't appreciate this piece of it or understand how she might communicate this to the track and field coach, and theoretically, because this is a non-skilled intervention I'm talking about, the track and field coach should be able to pick this up by herself. She doesn't need a physio intervention here because I believe this to be in the domain of the movement coach, the actual coach of record.
The problem there then is, in most cases, the track and field coach would intervene with a technical solution rather than a mechanical one.
So, and I feel like that's true because that's it's like saying to the physician, you only gave her, ibuprofen and pain meds. Well, the physician's like, these are the tools I have available to me.
Yes.
So let's expand that, the tools available. And also, again, the athlete here has a real opportunity to understand what's going on. And you can see that right leg actually never comes out of flexion. It's in flexion, still in flexion, still in flexion. She's still basically in flexion there. You see our pelvis is getting dragged forward. Yeah. She never, ever has the hip in extension relative to the pelvis at all, ever. And you can see that because we can actually see her body. So you can see how her belly she's basically creating another set of hips through her lumbar spine. And now we're just seeing leakages everywhere we go. So, again, would it be nice to have a physio come in and say, hey, I'm going to help mobilize this anterior hip and improve this hip extension? Yes. Would it be great to have a loaded movement practice where we're doing isometrics? And as a coach, it's crucial that we're thinking about, like, there's no such thing as a sports specific training movement in the gym. Right? We don't try to, but there are basic patterns that we know are the constituent parts to an athlete being able to express what's going on. Right. And by the way, you can't externally rotate your hip and extend it. You can't do it. I mean, that position says it all about, if you drew a line through her torso to her knee, you would see these nice little loops in there. So again, my takeaway is, wow, here's some really simple issues that are endemic to a lot of sprinters. What does this athlete understand about what she's working on? And if I asked her, what are you working on? She should say, my hip extension is gruff. Do you have some other new novel interventions here? Right? Versus, well, I have 10,000 drills to get my brain to think about how my foot is contacting through ground or how I'm bringing. It's impossible. So she doesn't even have the mental space for her brain to even understand what's going on. And then we think it's, she doesn't want to be coached. She's not coachable. Meanwhile, again, we haven't crossed off our hypothesis, and that athlete isn't being supported from her side, knowing what she needs to own, what she needs to be working on in the gym, what she can mobilize at home, and how the therapist is part of that conversation around that. And what we get here is a really potentially much faster human being. And my experience is there may be soreness as she adopts to new positions, because the fascia has to adopt, but she will not get injured if you give her range of motion back.
Yeah.
I don't see that happening.
That brings up a really important point, right? She's 23. This didn't happen yesterday. She hasn't been moving like this for 2 weeks. This is her solution. This is her native solution. At least as it is now, right? This is how she's moving, in a way which befits what her current intrinsic dynamics are, her current action capabilities, right?
And let's high five her for having such a great movement solution. She's made a cake out of 2 ingredients.
Right. So you say that, all right, because we gave the example earlier of the one sprinter I have who walks like a duck and sprints like a duck, and he's 30 and he's fast and he's never been hurt. And yeah, that's not necessarily the most efficient / effective way of sprinting for most humans, but maybe it is for him. And maybe if we went in there and actually did do an intervention, and even if we were patient with it, are we potentially opening up this system for a potential problem? If it hasn't moved in any other way than this for a year, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years.
So my response to that is, I'm going to begin to restore this athlete's native ranges by making sure, look,
what do you mean by native range then? Is the native range what she has the potential to have?
It's her potential. It's normative range, right? And so what we're thinking is, well, if this athlete, if this is a choice, then I want it to be a choice. If I bring the athlete on the table and bring his knee to his chest and he has no internal rotation, and it's a bony end feel and it feels stiff because he has a hip socket that's super shallow, and this is how this athlete is solving this problem, I'll figure that out, because I know that part of my job as a coach is to understand the parts of my athletes, right? When the athletes have pain, you suddenly are really interested in their athlete parts. But you're not interested in their athlete parts when they're sprinting. You have to be consistent here. Either I'm never going to talk to my athlete about their pain or what's going on or their nutrition or their tissue health, or I am, and I'm going to follow that. But if I bring the knee to the chest and I'm like, oh, plenty of hip flexion to get into the blocks and do what you need to do, and I internally, externally rotate, and I've got some, then I'm interested in like, hey, if we improve that and then express it in the gym so it's being loaded and trained and reminded, then that athlete actually might go from here to here. Mm-hmm. And that may be all the difference. It may be that athlete wants to make some improvement, but I don't have to be, well, let's just keep turning it out. Maybe you can just run with your heels forward and we're going.